Okay, so let's turn to Parshas Re'eh, chapter 13, verse 7. And this is an unusual law because normally you're not allowed to, you have to give everybody the benefit of the doubt. But there are some, and you're supposed to have mercy on everybody, but there's one character who you're not supposed to have mercy on. And you're not supposed to give them the benefit of the doubt. And does anybody know who that is? So that's who we're going to discuss now. Who's the person who doesn't get the benefit of the doubt and basically we treat harshly? So chapter 13, verse 7. Ki yisitcha. So hold on. We always look at the text before we go into the Talmudic text. We always look at the Rashi. So the word Rashi says for if you're,
And
I'm sorry,
is idolatrous the answer? Is the answer
it's not, the answer is it's not, yes, but not that simple. So it's not just idolatry. Idolatry would give somebody the benefit of the doubt if they're worshiping idolatry, but here it's not just that they're worshiping idolatry. Let me read the verse. If your brother, the son of your mother, or if the wife, somebody who's related to you, if your friend, your brother, the son of your mother, your son or your daughter, the wife of your bosom, or your friend who is like your own soul, will incite you secretly. So that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about a person who is inciting others. He's inciting others. Person who's not just himself sinning, but he's going around in secret and inciting others to sin. And what does he say? He says, let's go and worship other gods that you did not know, or you or your forebears. So it's not just that they're worshiping idolatry. We would give somebody the benefit of the doubt if they're worshiping idolatry, but it's this person who's going around in secret and is trying to get others secretly to worship idolatry. So we'll just look at, first we'll read the verses here and then we'll go back and read the Rashi. And they're trying to get you to worship from the gods of the nations that are around you, either those close or far away from you. Miksei haaretz, akatzei haaretz, from one end of the earth to the other. And the verse says, Lo tovelo, do not take kindly to him. Lo tishmai love, do not listen to him. Lo tachos eincha love, you shall not take compassion upon him. Lo tachmol lo tachaseh love, you should not cover up for him. Now, this goes against our instincts, as we want to be compassionate, we want to always give benefit of the doubt, we want to always be kind, but the Torah is telling us that there's a certain type of person who doesn't get that, and that's the person who's going around secretly and inciting others, and he's basically acting in a way that's extremely dangerous to other people. So therefore, we should not have compassion on such a person, and we'll see what that means. Kiarog Targenu, you have to kill him. Yad Chati Abo Barishonah, Lamito, you have to be the first one to execute him. Yad Koam Bachorna, okay. And everybody else after you, Skaltoba Vanim Vames, and you shall stone him, and then he'll be put to death. Because he sought to make you stray from God. He led you forth from Egypt, from the house of slaves. All of Israel will hear this and shall be afraid. And then they won't continue to do this anymore. So all of Israel will see what's going on here, and they won't continue. Now this is, before we look at the Rashi, I just want to say that this is something which is very contemporary, because we have people now who use their platforms, and they use their platforms in a very dangerous way to get other people to do things which are extremely, extremely dangerous, and they are convincing people to go down a path. And this is one of the dangers that we see, with social media, which is we really feel this law that people have a platform and they're using it to corrupt other people and to get them to do extremely dangerous things. And I think that even though the Torah is talking about somebody who goes in secret and says this, well, in the social media, people can hide behind their identities. They don't have to identify, but this is the idea that even though, and of course, this is the exception that proves the rule. This is the only time where we're not supposed to have mercy or compassion, where we see a person is presenting a danger, and the danger is that they are going to hurt other people or convince other people to act improperly. So, and we'll look at what Rashi says, but I just want to pause here if anybody has any questions about anything we said so far. Okay, so let's look at Rashi's on this. Rashi will give us the explanations. And then we will look at the Talmudic texts. Yes, Rashi. Okay, says Rashi. Ki yisitcha. What does the word yisitcha mean? Rashi says the word yisitcha is garoi, means to say it's provoking. And Rashi gives an example. Shemasil asokin. He leads this person to act in this manner. Achicha, your brother. Some of that's just examples of your family. We don't have to go into that. Okay. Then this person who's doing this is like your soul, meaning to say, even if the person who's the person who's convincing you to go down the wrong path, who's going around convincing them, is this somebody who you love? Rashi says, if it's like your father, meaning to say, even somebody who you feel so close to, if you have to act this way, now this is, of course, the hardest thing in the world, to recognize when people close to us are not acting properly. But even if the person is close to us, they don't get an exemption from this punishment, from the responsibility to treat harshly. And this is one of the most, I have seen so many times in my rabbinate, I don't know, so many times, too many times is the proper word, too many times people who are dealing with, let's say I want to say this in a way that's sensitive, but I'm sure I'm not going to be able to say it properly. Too many times people in their family are dealing with somebody who's in their own family who's not acting responsibly, who's not acting in a way that's safe, and they try to they're trying to help the situation, but they're not helping the situation because they're trying to act with what they think is compassion, but the reality is all they're doing in that situation is enabling that behavior to continue. And it's a very, very easy thing for somebody who's not part of the family to see, but it's incredibly hard for somebody who's part of the family to see that. And so what the Torah is saying here is that we have, even if the person is close to you, you cannot act with quote unquote compassion towards them. Now we go to the verse that they're acting with secrecy. They're acting in secret. Diber HaKosav B'Hoveh. So this goes to the question that Bruce asked, that to say Rashi saying this, the verse is speaking of that which is common, meaning to say it's not saying, it's not trying to imply that you're not allowed to listen to an insider only if it's said secretly. It's just telling us that the person who's trying to get you to do the wrong thing is usually speaking in secret. She'ein divrei mesis ela ben seter. It's usually the case that this person who's trying to incite you down the wrong path is speaking secretly. As Solomon says, "Benashef be'erev yom be'ishon laila va'afela," in the meaning to say, one who's being incited to embrace idolatry and heresy is doing this in the wrong at the time of twilight. Says the Rashi. You had a question, guy? Okay. So then they're trying to get you down okay. So Let's go to the verse 9 that says, Lo tovelo, do not take kindly to him. Rashi says, Lo tehe ta'evo, you shall not want him. Meaning to say, this word comes from the word desire. You shall not love him. We're commanded not to love this person. Because even though it says, it says you have to love your neighbor like you love yourself. Rabbi Akiva says this is the most important verse of the Torah. You must love your neighbor. But at zeh, this person, you're not allowed to love. Lo te'av, you shall not take kindly to him. Even though there's a commandment to love all Jews, the Torah is telling us don't love this person. This is very, very harsh. Very, very harsh. But I think that, to me, is what makes the Torah just even more powerful. That the Torah is all love, but the Torah is telling us that sometimes the lesson of love cannot be taught in a manner of love. And the Torah is speaking harshly here, but it's saying that this commandment to love your friend does not apply in this circumstance. And then it says, Lo tishmai love, you shall not listen to him. Rashi says here, I'm going to read this Rashi. It's extremely harsh, but I'll read it. Rashi says, Hitchanano al nafsho, when he pleads for his life, limcholo, for you to forgive him. Azov ta'azov imo, you shall surely help along with him. There's a general commandment to help people in the Torah, but not this person. This person you shall not help. What?
But if he changed?
You don't believe him at that point. You don't believe him. It's too late. Once he's done this and you caught him. We're talking about a case where he's already been arrested and he's on the death row. But obviously, if he says to you before he's convicted, he wants to change, and then we try to help him. But Rashi says, you shall not have compassion upon him. Because it says elsewhere, you shall not stand by the blood of your friend, but this one you shall stand by. This one you do not take pity. You had a question, guy?
What did he do again?
He's inciting people in secret to go down the wrong path. Here the Torah is talking about idolatry. But you have to understand what the Torah means when the Torah says idolatry. The Torah is talking about just a barbaric lifestyle, a lifestyle that is the opposite of everything the Torah is telling us, a lifestyle of wickedness. And so that's what this person was doing. He was encouraging others to go down this path. Such a person you shall not have pity on. Lo tachmol, here we have a further extension of this. Lo ta'apoch bizchuto. That means to say, generally speaking, when you come to the court in capital cases, the court was required to study it from every possible angle in order to find a favorable judgment or a legal technicality that would spare his life. Here are the verses telling us, do not do this in this case. Do not look for the loophole. Do not look for the way to save him. Do not cover up for him. If you know something which could lead him to his conviction, you're not allowed to be silent. Normally speaking, you're allowed to be silent. If you see the judges are speaking there and they missed the point that would convict him, you're allowed to be silent. But in this case, you're not allowed to be silent. This person is presenting, the Torah is understanding that this person is presenting an existential threat to our society. The person who's the danger to our society. But rather, what should you do? You must execute him. She says, what does this mean? If he left the court acquitted, you can bring him back for conviction. If, normally speaking, once a person leaves the court, like you can't double jeopardy. Once he's acquitted, you can't bring him back. But in this case, you can. And if he left convicted, normally speaking, you can bring him back and reopen the case. But in this case, you can't. So anyway, this is the law of the Maces. before we go into the Talmudic text, I want to see if anybody has any questions about this. Okay, it's a very harsh law, and it goes against, it's the exception. So I wanted to see if anybody. So let's see what the Talmud says about this. The Talmud says the following.
I'm sorry, Rabbi, I have a question. It may be a stretch.
Sure. Next discussion is chapter 14, verse 1. This is a very, 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 very important verse. Banim atem, I mean, all the verses are important, but this one is very relevant. Banim atem Hashem Elokechem, you are children to Hashem your God. Lo tisco to do. We'll see what that means. Lo tisco to do. So we'll have to see what that means in a moment. Lo tasimu karcha beinei nechem ames, and do not make a bald spot between your eyes for the dead. So there's the literal explanation of this verse, and then there's the explanation that is much more relevant for us. So first we'll look at the Rashi, and then we'll look at the Talmudic text. The Rashi says, "Lo tisco to do." Rashi translates that as, "You shall not lo titnu gedida masarapiv sarchem ames." Shall not make a cutting or a scratch in your flesh over a dead person. Kederach shamorayim osin. This is what the Amorites used to do. Meaning to say, if you ever seen like the Middle Eastern cultures, I don't know if they do this in Africa, guy, but when there's a grieving period, they sometimes mark their faces. They shriek and they mark their faces. You never saw that in Africa? And sometimes you'll see this in Middle Eastern countries. They'll be shrieking and marking their faces. So here it's a specific prohibition against marking your face, marking your body as part of the mourning process. The reason is Lafisha Atem Banim Shal Makom. You are the children of God. Matem Re'uyin Lios Naim. You're fit to be handsome. V'lo gedudim u'mukorachim. You're fit to be handsome and not cut and bald. Okay, I mean, basically, again, this is just a little tangent. This is not what I wanted to go into. But basically what it means is that you're not allowed to deface your body. You're not allowed to make your body deformed. And the reason is because you're children of God. And you're supposed to be handsome. So God has given us our bodies, and it's our responsibility to take care of our bodies and to protect our bodies and to treat our body well, to eat properly, to exercise properly, to not abuse it with reckless, dangerous behavior. So also, even though this is a general principle, but it especially applies when we're mourning for a dead person, because then there is this idea, when you're mourning for the dead, that you might think, okay, you're giving up on life. And so we're being told that you can't do that. But even though that is probably the literal way to read this, the Talmud in Yevamos tells us a different reading of this word. It's a midrash, but it actually has the force of law. The midrash says, Amar Reish Lakish Rabbi Yochanan. Reish Lakish taught Rabbi Yochanan. He said to Rabbi Yochanan, Ikri kan lo titko to do. It says here in the verse, lo titko to do. What does this mean? It means lo ta'asu agudot agudot. You're not allowed to make splinter groups within the community. You're not allowed that there's a prohibition against splintering the community. So the Talmud asks, but don't we need it to teach us this prohibition of not making a wound for a dead body? So therefore, the Torah could have said lo tigo to do. Why does it say tisgo to do? It's reflexive. That's to teach us this idea that you're not allowed to make agudot. You're not allowed to make splinter groups. So what does this mean? So the Talmud tells us that let's say there's one court in town that's giving rulings on there's one Beit Din, there's one court. You can't make a second court in that town. Meaning to say, we're talking about places where there are small towns. It doesn't apply in these cities like we have today. Like everybody's connected by the internet nowadays. So I don't know how exactly this would apply. But if there was a court in town, let's say they would establish the custom of the community, and then you come into the town and you establish a different custom in the community. That's a violation of this prohibition of lo titgo to do. Like a typical example, it would be that's usually given is if you go into a synagogue where everybody prays one way, and then you start to worship a different way in that synagogue, you're causing a rupture, a splinter. And according to the Maimonides, what's the reason for this prohibition? Maimonides says it's because it's going to bring arguments and disputes. Like, let's say, for example, you go into a synagogue where everybody is standing for the reading of the Ten Commandments, and you decide to sit. That's going to cause an argument. Rashi says a different explanation, that it makes it appear as though there are two Torahs. We want to at least have the unity of observing of the laws. And the Netziv, Naftali Tzvi Yehuda of Berlin, explains that what's the connection? It says, you are children to God, lo titgo to do. So he says, because you are children of God, therefore it's not appropriate for you to have within one community different customs that apply to my Torah, because children of one parent usually follow one path. So therefore that's appropriate. But if there were originally two courts in one town, it's not a problem. It's just you can't be the one to start the new custom in the town. And this is obviously a very important law, but there's a lot of gray area. When are you, everybody's kind of feeling like they have to act their way because they feel like spiritual does need to act with a specific custom. But there's here, the value is that even though there is a value to unity, there's also even though there's a value to acting in your proper way, there's also a value to spiritual unity and not to make splinter groups. So this is the law of lo titgo to do. And we were taught it, I remember when we were in yeshiva, when we went to Israel, around actually, let's say 32 or 33 years ago, I went to study there, and everybody in the yeshiva, all the Israelis were saying in Kilokenu at the end of davening. And the Americans, we didn't say in Kilokenu at the end of the weekday davening. It wasn't our practice. So we were just, when they were saying it, we were just doing our thing. We were just putting away our tefillin. And the Rosh Yeshiva gave us a special speech, and he cited this verse telling us, you're not allowed to do that, because even though it's not your custom, when you're with us, this is supposed to be your custom. Okay, so any questions about this? All right, so now we go on to the next verse, which is Parashas Re'eh has the prohibitions of the animals that we're not allowed to eat. And so we're going to go into a little bit about that now. Yeah, so Guy doesn't eat animals anyway, so it's not even a question for him. But for us it's relevant. So it says, chapter 14, verse 3, Lo tochal kol toeva. You're not allowed to eat anything that is an abomination. Well, typically speaking, toeva is an abomination. But Rashi here says it's not something that's objectively abominable, because there's nothing objectively abominable about eating, let's say, I don't know, a frog or a squirrel. These are not kosher animals. So Rashi says, Kol she'ta'avti lecha. I've made it abominable for you. And Rashi gives an example of something that is just abominable because God said so. Like, for example, if you intentionally slit the ear of a firstborn animal. So basically, firstborn animal is supposed to be sacrificed in the altar, but if it had by the Kohen, but if it had a mark on it, then the Kohen could just eat it regularly. But if it has, so it has to have a slit in it. But if you make the slit, then you can't eat it. So therefore, it became abominable, even though everybody else will look at it and say it's not abominable. So this is the law of all of these laws of kashrut are not laws. This is a very important Rashi, because some people might think, oh, the kashrut is about health reasons, or it's about these animals were dirty, or we don't eat the shellfish because they're on the bottom, and we don't eat no. Rashi's saying there's nothing about this that's objectively abominable. It's just that God declared it abominable. And that's the point. And Zota Behema Asher Tocheu. This is the animal which you shall eat. Sure. Sex seven vizim. The ones you could eat are the ox, the lamb, the sheep, and the goat. And let's look at what the Talmud here says. These are the animals that you should eat. So the Talmud says as follows. Tanya, Rabbi Meir Omer, God obviously knows that the non-kosher animals are much more than the kosher animals. Obviously, it's the case. There's only a few birds that we can eat. There's only a few animals that we can eat. Everybody knows that. So therefore, for this reason, God listed the kosher ones, because it's shorter. But when it comes to the birds, this is a little bit tricky. The Talmud assumed that the kosher birds were more numerous than the non-kosher birds. We obviously know that's not true today, because there are many more non-kosher birds. We only eat, even though there are 21 that are listed as non-kosher, and all the other ones are kosher, but we don't know the identity of those 21, so we don't eat any of them. But technically speaking, there are only 21 that are non-kosher, and all the other birds are kosher. But so therefore, the Torah listed non-kosher ones by the birds. The Gemara says, what's this teaching us? This is teaching us the idea, a person has to always say something in the shortest possible manner. A teacher is supposed to say something and teach it in the shortest possible manner. So there you go. Before there was Twitter, there was the Torah, which understood this. Okay. And then what are these kosher animals? Now it's very tricky. There's the ayil, the tzvi, and the yachmor. What is the ayil, the tzvi, and the yachmor? These are, the ayil is usually translated as like a gazelle or a hart, and the tzvi is a deer or a gazelle. Yachmor, we don't know what that is. The ako, the dishon, the to'o, the zamar. What are these animals? Let's look at what Rashi says. Rashi says the ako is the following. Hold on 1 second. By the way, you have to know what these animals are, because if you know what these animals are, you're allowed to write a Torah on them. What's the ako? The Onkelos translates it as the ibexes of the rock. So it's like an ibex. The ta'o is an ox of the forest. or a wild ox. So a wild ox is a kosher animal. And those are some of the kosher animals. Now we say v'chol behema mafreset parsa v'shosas shesa. So any animal that has a split hoof and which is completely separated, that brings up its cud, that you can eat. So let's look at the following text from the Talmud. Let's say you slaughter an animal and you find in it a dove. The Talmud discusses this. And you might think, look, why is this relevant? Why is this relevant? Well, I actually had this idea that you could take I would never do it, but I was thinking, I'm always trying to think of ways in which we can make things kosher. So let's say you take a pig embryo and you stick it into a cow. The technology is not there right now, but maybe in a few years. And then you have the cow giving birth to the pig. So what?
In that case, would be kosher.
No, I'm just going to, would that be kosher? Would that be kosher? So look at what this example is. I actually had that idea. And we're not yet there ready, but they are doing similar things with other animals. Believe it or not, because anyway, they are experimenting like that. So says Rabbi Yochanan. A shochet is a behemoth. One who slaughters an animal and you find a form of a dove inside it, you can't eat it because we need split hooves and it doesn't have it. So what?
You said they have to have what?
Split hooves. It needs to have. It's like the hoof of the animal needs to be split all the way through.
Like the feet?
Yeah. So if you have a dove, it's prohibited to eat because it doesn't have the split hooves. So basically, if you slaughter the animal, you have like a mutated form inside it, like this mutation, and it looks like a dove. It's obviously it wasn't a dove, but it was deformed and it looked like it. You couldn't eat it because it doesn't have split hooves. Well, if that's the case, what about if you're saying it's because it doesn't have split hooves? The Talmud says, well, if that's the case, if it has webbed feet and you slaughter the animal, it should also be prohibited. If you slaughter a mother cow and you find the baby, the fetus inside, and it's got webbed feet, but we know that that's permitted. So the answer is that this dove is never capable of having the split hooves. But this is a little tricky. It's a little tricky. And this, of course, when the Talmud was discussing these theories, it was 2,000 years ago. But now all of a sudden, all of this is relevant for us. There was this question here, the Imre Yosher, now it's all relevant because now we're making the animals in a laboratory. They're making the chicken, just the beef, just the chicken, just the beef. And they have these questions, whether or not it can be kosher when it's manufactured. Could you make something in the laboratory and it will be kosher? Like, could you make the pig and it will be kosher if it doesn't have the split hoof? So this is somewhat relevant. And they even hundreds of years, or not hundreds of years ago, but a long time ago, maybe 50, 60 years ago, they started talking about machines that were making eggs, I guess incubators. And those chickens, generally speaking, at a smaller lifespan, and they want to know if those were permitted, or if it was similar to like this bird that was being born in the cow. So they're going to announce probably soon that the OU is going to give certification to this lab-grown meat and chicken, but they're going to call it meat and not dairy and not parv. The question is, are they going to ever rule that the pig that is grown in the lab is kosher? And I'm sure the OU won't do it, but there will be other rabbis who will say it's kosher. And we shouldn't be afraid about that because the Talmud says, the Zohar says, in the Messianic era, there will be pigs, the pig will become kosher. So maybe this is the opportunity, but even if this is not the opportunity, there'll be other opportunities to make the pig kosher. Anyway, anybody have any questions before we stop? Yes, Guy has a question.
Since we're on the